Hey, Chris, wonderful to have you here and great to have you in OMG. Welcome. I saw your post. Okay. So today I thought what would be good is I have a number of kind of related points to share with you, but we can maybe do and continue with this perhaps in the next webinar we'll see is an over the shoulder. We'll go through some of like I refer to outer frames or like kind of foundational perspectives and so forth. So we'll get specific with some of those things and how I know what they are and how you can. And also talk about that concept of perspectives, conceptual boxes, why they matter, and that sort of thing. Hey, Lawrence. Hey, doing great to have you here. All right. So I have some notes. I'll come back to this about we'll do it. So we'll start a kind of sub part of this Law of Implication 2018 series. Well, I'll be taking a look at specific like outer foundational frames that'll help us. And I'll start by talking about how that works, what and why I'm doing that. Here's an interesting little thing too, specifically for sales and business. Now I've given you some different little schemes and formulas that help, that in and of themselves give you outer frames that when you step back, we still need to, if you step back and get perspective, like if you're thinking about your business and where you want to go next, or if you're thinking about how you want to approach a particular sales presentation with a potential client or whatever that might be, or you're writing something on your website and you feel like, wait, I want to step back, think what's going to be like for a visitor and overall, what do I want to accomplish with this sales letter or communication on my website, whatever it might be. Or you're having something go on with business relationships, good or bad, or starting a new project and you say, all right, let me step back, let me get the big picture. And so, but if you step back, then you still need to fall back on some perspective, right? Like your feet, metaphorically speaking, have to be standing on something, right? So I'm going to say two things at once here. One is we want to have a better understanding, and then not just understanding, but then of course that any better understanding naturally leads to better action and practice and thinking. So we want to better understand in a practical way how thinking with perspectives works and how to take advantage, how to do it properly. Of course, we do it automatically, but we want to, with what I have to share with you, it should be significantly more effective. The other thing in conjunction with understanding thinking with perspectives is the question, which can lead to an answer that I have, but is it possible to think without perspectives or without assumptions? And the answer to that begins with it's actually critically necessary. When people don't do it, which they don't, then you're relying much more on luck. Like a lot more is out of your control than needs to be. You're giving up a lot of your power. You're not thinking and planning and being strategic in a way that would greatly help you. If you did, life will be much easier and success will be more reliable. The goals that you go after will be more beneficial to you because you'll spot issues with the goal itself or how you have it set up in your head, all this. But nearly all of your thinking will be done with perspectives through a lens and so forth. So the idea here is not that it's bad to think with a conceptual lens or perspectives. You'll do that almost all the time. It's actually pretty limited and arduous to think without a perspective, but it's critically necessary as well as part of the mix. And the reason, but absolutely crucial time to think without a perspective is to do what? Is to set up your foundational perspectives, right? And build that. If you don't correctly build your outer perspectives, then what happens is when you try to step back, when you try to observe or think about what's going on or plan or be strategic, then all you're doing is stepping back to you have two problems. One of the problems you run into is that when you step back, you're landing or standing on a perspective that is still flawed because it just got set up starting when you were an infant and imposed upon your mind by all kinds of random, right, in the environment, your parents, the culture, and so forth. So until and unless you think without a perspective and set things up properly, you are not actually thinking for yourself, right? Because when you think where your thoughts and culture and outer perceptual perspectives come from, you might feel like they're coming from you at this point, but that's an illusion that your brain projects, right, on things. And it just gives you a false feeling of solidity and confidence. Obviously, your perspective until and unless you manage to think without one and get it exactly straight. It just comes from a conglomeration of experiences and culture and things that you absorb, right? Starting when you're young, and especially the process by which you develop perspective is in and of itself was was done for you when you were very young, and it was very flawed. So the first problem is the flaws in the perspectives that people have, like kind of the outer boxes and overall frame and understanding of the world. It makes life so much harder constantly, it makes goals, makes making money so much harder and so much less reliable than it needs to be. So that the first problem is the flaws. The second problem is that because of the flaws and because of a lack of method and understanding for really thinking for yourself, for thinking without a perspective and getting things straight, you know that generally when people start to think quote unquote deep thoughts, right? These aren't deep. You're standing on something. So you're either standing in crap or you're standing in something good and solid. And it's not deep if you're standing in crap. Like if someone's literally standing in crap, then it's not a deep thought to say maybe you should stand somewhere nice, right? Or if your house is crap or where you live is crap, moving is not like a deep thought. It might be that kind of a metaphorically a foundational type of thought, right? Where you live, where you're physically standing. If you live in a dangerous neighborhood, right? Or if you're living in a house with people that you don't need to live with that are undermining you, then it's not like deep to try to move or get out of that. Right? If you're in a relationship that is very detrimental to you, then it's not like deep. It's deep in one sense. It's deep in the sense that it pervasively affects your life, right? So same thing with thinking about your foundational. When I say your foundational worldview, I'm not even necessarily talking about your views about God or politics or whether you like yourself, but there's all kinds of views about how goals go about getting set and then how they get framed and like whether or not you are fairly afraid or the fear that kind of pop up that kind of inhibit your action that you hardly even notice. Right. If those things are flowing from the way that you look at goals by default, then that can be changed. You can look at things differently. You can have a powerful confidence that doesn't come from needing to yourself that you're already so awesome. Typically people, that's the only way they can get to feeling confident is based on their past performance, which leads to a kind of cyclical anxiety where they need to perform well now, right? Like in their next thing. And they're worried about doing that because if they don't, then not only will they not get what they want, but they'll also undermine their confidence for the future in their view. And it's a whole anxious and difficult cycle, which then makes performing harder. And then that's a negative cycle. So that sort of stuff flows and all those difficulties flow from having the wrong kind of foundational frames in life about how the mind works, how goals work, and a number of things related to stuff like that we talked about in law publication. So I was saying that there's two problems that people encounter when they try to step back. The first being the flaws themselves in their outer frames. But the second is that as you start to think about what is a goal or what do I really want or something like that, then people get tangled up. They don't know what to do. I've talked in the previous two webinars how our brain fabricates certainty, and that's not bad. It's how it's how our brain works by default, and that can be harnessed, and it's necessary as part of the mix. A little bit like it's necessary if my car, I've used this illustration in the past. If my car, if it's in motion, it has a default motion, right? Like now that default motion might plow me into another car at a stoplight or even a house at a T intersection or something. But that doesn't mean that the default motion of my car is bad. It just needs to be steered. It needs to be part of the mix. It's harnessed. If my car didn't move ever by default, that would be worse, right? So your brain operating the way it does by default is terrific, but having no very good sense of steering or having way too limited view of steering. People think that they work hard and they earn their success and that it's not luck and all that because they're doing a lot of stuff inside of the box, so to speak. But there's a second type of work or thinking or effort or endeavor that has to do with getting your boxes right. And we can see this in kind of a mundane way, but poignant way as we achieve financial success. That even just being an entrepreneur and having any success with it, you'll encounter people that don't do that that they, oh, I'd love to trade places with you, or I'd love to have that. But what they don't want to do is is like step out into kind of a scary place, being an entrepreneur in a lot of cases. And it's not that entrepreneurs necessarily work harder than some employees. In a lot of cases they do, but in some cases they don't. But like the people who take care of my lawn, they're entrepreneurial anyway, but they work very hard, but their money is ultimately going to be limited because they're not willing to do a different type of work, which is to step out of what they know and venture into the unknown, right? Generally, to get wealthy, you're going to be venturing into the unknown for a certain amount of time until you figure out something greater, right? Some way of understanding how to make money that wasn't obvious. It wasn't shown you in school and you weren't exactly trained for it first in a lot of cases. Well, sometimes people, it just happen where it's in the box for them to make a lot of money. But for most of us, it's not, me included. I had to wake up in the morning and not only work pretty much every day, all day for years. And I no longer do have to do that, but for years I did. But I would wake up in the morning, day after day, literally for years, where it basically felt every single day where I didn't know how the heck to go about doing what I needed to accomplish in terms of getting a product made or keep working. And then in terms of getting leads to it and how to sell it or how to do individual projects for that. I didn't know what was going to work or what was going to happen in a lot of ways in various parts of that day after day. I wouldn't know how to do what I needed to do in order to go to sleep that night. And I look forward to not having that be but it was the case. And so I'm not making a value judgment, but in practice, that and I'm explaining this whole thing what I'm talking about, getting out of the box as an entrepreneur just for the last couple of minutes. It's a great illustration and parallel and metaphor for what we can also do with our thinking about success, about our mind and so forth, with similar results and scale and ultimately more pervasive results, both with making money and then with it, since it's more pervasive, it's more meta to your life to think about getting your perspective straight, your thinking straight, your conceptual boxes straight and so forth, your understanding of success and strategy and how it works. That's going to affect more than money, which can make it look like it's not as directly applicable to making money, but it's fully applicable and it has all kinds of other benefits too, as a lot of we've been at this for years together in a lot of cases. But it's poignant, right, with being an entrepreneur, right? Because you'll run into people, and as you have more and more success, or obviously people are at different ranges of how much success they're having. I think pretty much everyone on here is making money as an entrepreneur, but you're right. But people act as if it's just effort, like what they're doing, and it's an additional type of effort. And I'm not saying that makes us better, but it is something else that we're doing, and it's unless we're just lucky, and some people are. And when I say lucky, I mean that literally, right? If the framework, the overall perspectives that and just life circumstances are enough that you can just do the normal type of effort that other people do when they're employees and make a lot of money as an entrepreneur, then there's luck involved because that means that you didn't have to think outside of your box in order to make a lot of, to a certain degree too. If you don't have to wake up every morning for years like I did and not have any idea what to really do. Like in some sense I had an idea, but there was aspects of what I had to do every day that I didn't really know then that's nice. Nice for you. I'm glad. But to some degree, you will have stepped out, right, of what was comfortable for you, presumably, in most every case. And then people that don't do that, they don't really have a concept that you did that in a lot of cases, right? They just think, oh, you work hard, I work hard, we both work hard. And if you end up making a lot of money, then they, not necessarily jealous, but they just think that something happened. They don't know why. They don't understand that in order to switch places with you, so to speak, then they have to do something that doesn't necessarily have to be uncomfortable, but by default it is. And it probably will be in reality, right? Unless you somehow or maybe we can do it together here, but get your kind of overall deep thinking so straight that with what I understand now about the law of implication and so forth, I'll probably have an even easier time repeating what I did, but where I had to figure things out, but still. But I knew what I did now and that helped. Okay. So I wrote here on this slide, I'm just going to spend a moment on this and then get back to the main thing. But I want to have this in the backdrop so you can see how one way to apply what we'll cover. So on a simple level where you don't have to look too deeply into this, although as you look more deeply into it, you'll get more benefit. But even just the kind of surface meaning of what I'm saying will be a helpful scheme for you in a lot of cases. And this is just, again, a helpful scheme. It's not the end all be all or the only way to look at it, of course. But you know how, for example, I taught you with sales, I have a kind of simple shortcut that in conjunction with an overall experience and understanding and some other formulas that are automatic for me these days, then it works for me to have the overall scheme that's not on the slide, but I've shared in the past multiple times about like vision plus justification, right? If you're selling, then if you have a general understanding of what's going on and also have what I have here will be helpful. But you can get to where a number of things are intuitive, and then you can just unconsciously think in terms of, all right, I want to paint a vision for the person that I'm selling to, either when you're marketing to a group or one-on-one, a compelling vision, right? Something that is fleshed out, triangulated in, where you describe what's going to happen, right? If they become your client or buy your product or whatever it might be. And it's precise enough that it feels real to the person and attractive, and it's attractive to them based on where they're at in their life. And if you have that vision, then people want to believe it. Once you have an attractive vision in your mind, right? Like if you're dating and you meet somebody and you picture how in your mind, just for whether they say anything or not, if it turns out to be that this just naturally happens at times, you meet someone and you just start to imagine how it could be that night, in the future, in a week, in a month, maybe your whole life, whatever, right? So that's a vision. Once you have that vision, then you're biased, and any justification will do, right? If they make any sort of joke that plausibly is funny, you'll feel like they're funny. And so vision and justification, and including that the justification can be pretty simple at that point. And you don't want to reverse that. You don't want to start with justifying and then somehow try to do vision late. Vision has to come first. Okay, so that's something I've already covered in the past. I find it to be a very helpful sales technique perspective. And then I'm going to give you another one that can be helpful. And the vision and justification is a scheme for your presentation itself, like how, excuse me, it kind of structures what you say. This is a different sort of thing. This is, in a sense, kind of preparation based for sales. But if you're, I read something, not even in a book about sales, actually in a fiction book about but like a fantasy novel where the main character was a con artist who ends up having to save the world, etc. But he mentioned in the book, but it sparked, I didn't learn from that, but it just sparked a thought that is pretty fairly true, which is that, and of course I've talked about confidence before, so I already had this thought, but how if you are going to be able to come across as confident, but then that's maybe 60% of making a sale, right? But then or 50% or whatever. And then this other thing, if you do the following two things, confidence is half, and then what I have written next is half, then that's generally going to work. And not even really just with sales and marketing and conversion, but in a sense with business as a whole, to the extent that your business consists of relationships, like your ability to perform a service can be accomplished through the same overall sense of things with confidence and connecting the dots and whatever is naturalness. Your business as a whole, if you're confident about it and if you're willing and able and do connect the dots conceptually and actually that need to be connected. And this is, in essence, a kind of a simple synopsis of things I've covered, I think, last webinar and perhaps a bit before that, but especially last webinar. But I think by pointing it out in this way, it gives you something simple when you are stepping back and thinking, all right, how do I make my business work better? Or how do I prepare for this sales presentation or whatever? Then this both helps you prepare and it also helps avoid feeling like you're missing something. That's a huge part of a lot of what I teach in all sorts of ways. And it's when I come up with these sort of simplified schemes for you, then a big part of what it's doing is not just giving you these two things, but making you so you don't have to worry and doubt and wonder if you need to look somewhere else. I try to give you things where with vision and justification, it fully takes care of your sales presentation. Because most anything else that you might say is important for sales would be, in a sense, related to those things. It includes those things. This sort of does the same thing, such as vision and justification. Knowing that will help give you confidence, right? So there's a way that these two concepts kind of form a whole. There's a whole bunch of details you can add in a good way, but they're going to give you a kind of a whole way to look at things. So everything we do to help build your confidence in a real sustainable way that's quite rock solid and adaptable, as opposed to needing to have constant feedback that you're always hitting your goal and as soon as you want to hit it and all that stuff, right? The kind of bad way to try to get confidence that kind of makes you anxious and manic and arrogant and all that, right? The typical way that people want to go about achieving confidence by seeing themselves succeed, right? Which is means that you either get on kind of a roll, right, when you're doing it the wrong way, but the trouble is it's very fragile. And when it breaks worse, it's a little bit analogous. The bad way of doing confidence is a little bit like the bad way of influencing people, where there's a threat that you're going to get upset, angry, complain, cry, passive aggressive in various ways, right? When you do that, then while you're on a roll, if you're leading an organization or even just in partnerships and you're getting people to do stuff, while things are good, then if you're leading in that wrong way, and you don't have to be the leader to lead in the wrong way. Everyone's leading in the sense of what you do is affecting how other people perform, right? Either by being the lowest common denominator or pulling people forward. If you're doing it in the wrong way, then when things are good, it looks like it's working. But when things start to go south, they break hard and fast, right? If you're basically acting like sort of a jerk or passive aggressive or whatever to get what you want, then it's easy to illustrate with someone who's using fear to get what they want. While they're strong, then people want to be around them because they're strong and it all appears to work. But the minute they fall, then people are all too willing to kick them while they're down and then enjoy it. Right. The way that I operate is very different, where it might be a little less fast in the moment sometimes to not fly off the handle every second. But if things start to go wrong, then people want to rally me and help me and support me and so forth. Right. And I've seen that plenty. It's not just a theory. And of course it makes sense, right? If you operate in a certain way, then, and same way with confidence, if you do it in the right way, then it's there for you when things aren't just going right by partial luck, right? Because even if you put a bunch of effort in, think of a bunch of smart things, all the factors outside of your control are still happening by luck, right? Of logic. So things aren't always going to go perfectly, no matter how smartly you are, and no matter how hard you work and all that. So everything that properly built our confidence, which this series, Law of Application, 2018, whatever, it'll do a lot of other things for you, but it'll give you a real different sort of rock solid confidence or build on it. I know that there's been plenty of feedback in the past that things we've been covering over the last few years have greatly helped people's confidence, right? So that's good. That'll naturally create a situation where by default, you'll perform and sell, but not just sell, just all kinds of stuff, right? If you're in a partnership and doing a project, then with your partners, if you're confident in the right way, in a constructive way, and if you're powerfully confident, then of course that's going to create a terrific backdrop and for your project to succeed, right? You're going to attract that confidence. You're going to bring it out of others, right? You're going to attract people that are higher caliber as different types of customers and other partners and whatever else is going on. And you'll have an easier time taking action. Right? All right. And then connecting the dots is a big deal. And I want to do this justice. I want to do it somewhat brief justice, but I want to do it justice here. If you just take away a better understanding of this concept, it'll be huge for you from this webinar. Even though it's not exactly, in one sense, it's not my main topic, but in another sense, this confidence and connecting dots will give a very practical reason why I'm talking about the rest of what I'm talking about today and in the future. In one way of thinking, the interesting thing is that as you connect the dot, it'll be a cycle with confidence. So it might even be that connecting the dots is almost like one thing all by itself, that if you do in the way and I'll explain, then it might be like the end all be all in one way of looking at it. It might be one kind of full on angle at what'll help you succeed with sales and business as a whole. Because again, it leads to confidence in a certain way fully. It's the real way to build the right type of confidence. including like I'm talking about where you're building your outer frames. That's part of what I mean by connecting dots, is getting your foundational understanding of things proper. And then you can always, once you do that, you could step back to that always. And what happens when you step back, and this is part of the main topic when I'm talking about this, talking about these conceptual boxes and foundational frames and explaining how it works. When you step back, including when you step all the way back to the most foundational sense of what's going on in the world for yourself, who you are, and then you see there's two ways, both of which are valid, but they're valid at different times. There's two ways to see outside the box that you're practically speaking currently using. You're not really in a box, you're using a box. A box and a perspective are basically synonymous. And a perspective is a set of assumptions, many of which are invisible that you don't realize that you're using, right? Even the definitions of various words or the practical usage of the words like money and sales and so forth are part of a box that you're using. So think of a box as not as something that necessarily that constrains you as the only thing that it does. It has the effect of constraining you, but not that's only as a natural consequence that's neither bad nor good. You just want to, again, it's one of those things where it's not wrong that a perspective constrains you, but you want to work with that. You want it to constrain you, like just a very simple metaphor to like a seatbelt constrains you, which is good when you want it to constrain you. And then when you want to get out of the car, then you undo your seatbelt. But you don't undo it because it's fundamentally bad that it constrains you. It's just a natural effect of or whatever of what it does. Right. And then you sometimes want it to be that way and you sometimes don't. So a perspective has the effect of constraining you, but a perspective or a box or kind of a small box that you're operating in at a certain time is not, again, not bad. However, and it can be helpful. Like you want to narrow your focus and you can't be questioning every assumption that you're operating on at every moment while you're trying to act, right? So it's fine, right? It is what it is. However, equally obvious is there's times when you want to stop and have a sense of the perceptual box that you were otherwise in and see outside of it, right? Get other perspectives and so forth, or get a larger perspective and such. So to see outside the box, you're actually not inside the box looking out so much as inside the box, getting a sense that, wait a second, I'm struggling in a way that is a red flag, which virtually all struggle can be like that. All right. And so it's not like you try to look out the box and that what you want to do is step back to a larger perspective. Like, all right, what's my overall objective with this project? Might be a stepping back, right? It doesn't mean you're asking fundamentally, who am I as a being? That's totally valid as well at different in other circumstances, but that's not the only thing we're talking about, right? You might just say, all right, like I said, like overall, what am I trying to do with this project? Or when it comes to making money, stepping back might be, I want to make profit, right? Or it might be, again, it might be not even that far back, right? It might just be, what's my overall objective for today? And you can imagine losing sight of that, right? You can imagine it's 11 a.m. and you're wrapped up in something and there's some red flag that goes off. You realize, wait a second, this isn't probably very productive, or I'm struggling in some way that doesn't feel right. And so then you might, well, wait a second, what's my priority for today? And the answer might be, there's a few things I need to accomplish, right? But if there's a few things, then you still need to pick one thing and do it at a time, right? Unless you can legitimately do more than one thing at a time, you could just look at it and understand which one it is. But anyway, it's still at any moment, it's generally one thing. So you see, so here's a relatively useful and profound statement. Outside of your perspective or your box, by actually stepping back and you're still looking inside the box, once you step back, you're in like a larger box, right? Expanded perspective, but it's still a perspective. And then you're looking around. That's most of the way that you're going to be operating in life is you're standing in one place that allows you to see a certain amount, right? Like you can think of it. I'm going to use two illustrations so we don't get too constrained by the idea of a box. If you're standing on a mountain, little hill, and you're looking out, then that's how far you can see. That's metaphorical to a box. Or we could just picture in terms of boxes as well, where you can see what's in your box. If you have an existing outer box and you use that, then you can see a larger area. But the things that you're often, we don't get as much magnification, right? You don't see as much detail. You're not as we start to delve into one place, then we start to get immersed there, and the box sort of naturally constrains behind us in a sense, which again is helpful when it's helpful. It's natural and it helps you to see in more detail, in essence, the small part that you're looking at. But then there's times when that, of course, becomes unhelpful as well. And that's when you want to expand your perspective, but you're not really looking outside of your box so much as stepping back into a greater box that already exists in your thinking, right? Again, it already exists in this case, because we're going to need to distinguish this from being able to think outside of our boxes that currently exist, such as in order to fix certain things, right? So there's two different things going on, and it's very important to distinguish them. And typically people have no distinction like I'm talking about. So by me explaining this one thing that's going on, which involves one way of getting outside of your current zoomed in perspective, right? A box, is to step back to an existing box in your mind, right? Like I gave you the illustration about during your day, stepping back to an existing sense of what do I want to accomplish today? What are my priorities for today? Or what is my one priority for today? Stepping back and thinking about that. Maybe you already know it, or maybe by asking that question, you automatically step back into what's my project. But whatever it is, you're stepping back into an existing perspective that's already there in your mind, but it's more wide, right? A little more foundational. It's more foundational to ask what's my goal for today or my priorities for today versus when you're wrapped up in a little task, maybe you started to get on a tangent or something. But I think the way people normally think about boxes is they sometimes think that they're looking from inside out, and you're not really doing that. You step back first, and that allows you to see more. Okay. So that's gonna come up where that'd be helpful to have that distinction. Like I said before, sometimes it'll matter to have the greater clarity, like I presumably just gave you about this. Sometimes it won't, because practically speaking, it won't matter that you didn't have that clarity in life, right? But it's the kind of thing that comes up constantly in your life, right? You're constantly thinking with these perceptual boxes and needing to zoom in your perspective, zoom out your perspective, and having a sense and a good framework for how it actually works is going to consistently help you. But I'm not claiming that it will always matter. In other words, your previous or the normal understanding of a box, which is much more vague, works sometimes, but then it doesn't work other times. And that's why it's better to have it's the kind of thing where understanding it well is going to pay off consistently. Especially, it'll help you. Not only that, but it's a crucial part of the whole puzzle of me explaining the rest of what I'm explaining. So it's a building block in addition to being useful in another. All right. So that's one of two ways to see outside the box. So trying to see outside the box from within the box is nonsense. You don't actually do that, even if you think you are. So there's two ways when you're struggling, you're having any kind of problem where you feel like it's based on your perspective is too narrow or your assumptions are off, trying to figure out what you're missing, right? Which is even the more aware you are, the more meta you think, the more you're aware that kind of thing is going on all the time. You're always missing stuff that could be really helpful to figure out, or having assumptions that we're not realizing. We're using our mind again as giving us false certainty, like filling in our blind spot constantly. Often that's useful, but sometimes it's not. And in any of these cases, anytime that we might otherwise call like a lateral thinking or whatever, then whenever it's helpful to see outside a box, then again, there's two ways to do it. One of which involves stepping back to an existing perspective that's more broad, more basic, more foundational. The other way is quite unknown. And typically people, once in a while, they'll think and behave as if it's possible and use it, but they won't really fully realize what they're doing, and it's not distinguished. That's the best. And now I'm talking about thinking without a perspective at all. And it's a necessary part of your toolbox. Like, it's beyond necessary. It's like crucially necessary. It's fundamental to the law of implication and to success and to really being happy and to having much easier, consistent, and reliable success. Obviously, if there's flaws in your outer perspective, then you're just screwed until and unless you can fix them. And you're screwed exactly to the extent that they screw you up, right? So whatever you're experiencing now in your life, as much as your deeper perspectives are not screwed up, then that's the benefit to you. And as much as they are, then it constantly causes you issues. Every time you fix one of the flaws, which you've probably done several times throughout, if you're not new to this, right? If you've been with me for a while, then you know how nice it is and how that whole issue in your life gets cleared up automatically, right? Whatever, or how just everything becomes a little nicer automatically and making money becomes easier and so forth. Or possible in some cases, right? We never know when flaws are going to totally block us. Flaws in our deeper perspectives and understanding of things and how the mind works and how goal achievement works and all that. If the only thing you can do is to think with perspective and a lens, as people often affirm, they'll affirm both it and its opposite at different times in different ways or imply both. But you can pretty much get any person to quickly give up and say, of course, you always make assumptions. You always have to think with perspective or a lens, right? And 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that he makes that point. You always think with a lens. The problem is, or the proof, which relates to a proof of why we better hope that there's another way. If we can only think with a lens or a perspective or assumptions, then like I just indicated, we're really screwed because whatever our deepest lens is, whatever lens we started with, right? Whatever prime directive, whatever it was with the Star Trek. I'm not a big Star Trek fan, but I'm generally aware of it a little bit. Was it Data? I think an android, and they have this prime directive, and they can't, being an android couldn't violate that, whatever that was. So, right, by logic, you're screwed by any flaws in your perspective or in your kind of assumptions. That's why I say your epistemology. Whatever flaws there are in your epistemology, which is your basic method that your mind uses of figuring out what's true, how the world works, and it's the method of how it goes about building a model of the world. Not the model itself, but the building of it. If the method for building your model of the world is flawed, which it is by default, bad, flawed in the way that a seatbelt, like flawed in the sense that it's not supposed to operate on its own. You're not built wrong, just like a car is not built wrong for going straight when it's driving by default, right? But you're built to work with and to do what you need to do in order to get things straight so the method of how you build your model for the world itself, that method is flawed. That's your deepest perspective. And that's a lens. And again, it's incorrect. And what happens is it's not like people stop and use it to think anyway, because it's incorrect. Our mind protects us from even thinking about it. So no one even hardly has the word epistemology in their vocabulary. And if they do, it's typically not something they think about. And if they do think about it, they're a philosophy major professor, and they twist the activity and the meaning of it to where it's meaningless and pointless and worthless. One of those. But we don't want to think about it because as we get close to it, it's scary and confusing. And so we kind of have this defense against thinking about it. But the only possible way to get outside of the box that we're start out with is to do some kind of thinking that actually is not with a box at all. And so what I'm going to do with you in the part of this webinar that's left, and then in the future for however long it takes, a webinar or two probably, is to build with you some of the kind of foundational frame that's going to make your life easy about who you are, how you think. And I'm already doing it, of course, always, but be specific about it. Now, I've started talking about connecting dots, and then I started talking about boxes, which is all part of the topic that I wanted to cover. So it's all good. In business, in practice, in reality, what people stay blind to, shy away from, is they find all kinds of ways to feel like they're making progress, except for connecting all the dots. And if you come to understand that mistake and then get it right for yourself, and then it'll start to feel more and more right, and it will be awesome for you. And success will be very differently reliable and easy as always, including sales, including working with people, including getting stuff done in your own day and so forth. So, like I've talked about in the past, it's helpful to know your strengths and so forth, and it's nice and it's helpful to theoretically know I want to do the activities that are going to make me money, for example, rather than do activities that aren't going to make me money. But what's really going to make your money is not just it's not fundamentally about doing your strength. Of course, that's ideal. It's not fundamentally about just doing activities to make money. It's fundamentally about doing all that it takes, both with planning and then doing, to do all the parts of making your particular business endeavor work. And because I talked about progress before, it's easy to our brain easily starts to give us dopamine or whatever for making progress. And it's possible to perceive ourselves making progress and never reach our target or threshold, never get over the bar while feeling like we're just making progress constantly. Right? You can get more and more leads, you can rank on more websites. Heck, you can make money and spend it, and you're not making progress towards accumulating the money you need in order to not have to do stuff for money, which has got to be preferable, right? I can't think why anyone would want to have to do stuff for money their whole life, right? If you want to do stuff that ends up earning you money, that's one thing, but it's nice to have a choice. It's the same type of thinking why I don't like to have monthly expenses or any kind of things where there's like an ongoing cost, because then I have to do stuff, which is like it lowers my flexibility, right? My adaptability. So you can't have one leaky bucket, right? Or one place where the circuit is not connected. And you can see that things that you do that are successful, all the dots got connected. Now, sometimes people do what they're willing to do and it ends up working because by luck, the things that they didn't make sure were connected, got connected. Right? Now, ultimately getting to figure out how to think without perspectives and getting your outer foundational frames of understanding what's going on in the world and in reality and stuff is part of connecting the dot to assure that you don't need luck, period. That's the situation I'm in, where I'll harness luck, obviously. Like I don't control everything, but the luck happens like within the box, not outside the box, not like outside the box that I'm aware. Right? I don't have to rely on my foundation being right. I just have to harness when the details are in my favor and work out, which is a very different type of luck, right? If you go to the casino and you have a 70% chance of winning every hand of blackjack, then you're not relying on luck. You're harnessing random factors, but it's not luck when you win money. You automatically win money, right? If the odds are in favor of the house, then over time, you'll definitely lose money, right? So the reason why I talk about getting your foundational frames right regarding both business and then deeper than that is understanding like life, right? And how your mind works and all that. It's just like the odds are in your favor, like the house, right? Regarding like casinos is you're the house, right? You're making money always. That's why I am able to say and have it keep working out that everything I touch turns to gold, that I always succeed, literally. I'm either going to get annihilated or I annihilated in a literal sense where I no longer, right? Or I get to success because the method of success that I follow automatically actually works. And people have no concept of it because it's based on getting the outer frames right. And people want to do everything but that, right? So they'll do any amount of effort or 24/7 sometimes, but not get their outer frames right. We can see this with just a random illustration about picking on anybody or any group of people, but mothers, who loves their kids more than mothers overall, or as in general? Of course, there could be individual exceptions, but the one thing that mothers are just about universally unwilling to do is figure out what's actually going on, how their mind actually, and I don't mean how the world works like political things, right? I'm talking about like basic logic and understanding who we are and how to think straight and the nature of money, what it's involved with making it, how relationships work, right? Things like that. Not like what's really going on as if there's a conspiracy at Bilderberg. I'm none of that. If anyone's new to me, nothing to do with that. How do goals work? How should we approach goals? How do we look at that? How does fear work? What's the recipe for that? So we can dissolve it. How does confidence work? That sort of stuff is what I'm talking about. That sort of stuff is what mothers are unwilling to do. So they do not love their children or themselves, of course, enough to figure out that whether God exists. They might guess one way or the other, depending on what they absorbed in their growing up, right? One way or the other, or at some point in their lives. But they're literally unwilling to do that, to think without perspectives, figure out what's really going on. So they do not love their children enough to do that. So it's a very powerful illusion, fear, repulsion, whatever it is. It's so powerful that it's so much stronger than a mother's love for their child that basically no mother, even not even a few, really break through it. Shocking. They literally, mothers do not love their children enough to think straight. And neither do fathers, of course. I take mothers, but same thing can be said for fathers, absolutely. People might be willing to die for somebody else, but they would so death is preferable in a huge, and for almost universally, to thinking straight. An extraordinary illusion because, of course, thinking straight is just wonderful. It just purely is both enjoyable, done right, but it's really enjoyable from the get-go if you just even have a glimpse of what it means. Then it's exciting and enjoyable, and the rewards are extraordinary, including for just actually making money easily and confidently in real life, to the point where literally it's the best use of my time in helping you. That's why I talk about this, right? I make sure you have direct SEO training, of course, and client getting training. But for me, it's not just that I'm interested because it's important. I talk about it because it's the best way I know of to help you, and immediately and assuredly. So this connecting the dots thing is, if I can just do this justice in this webinar, then we're in great shape. And I'll see how far I get with anything else. So ultimately, connecting the dots even means getting your deepest perspectives right. However, there's that, but then there's specifically, I've given you the kind of intermediate perspective, but quite foundationally helpful, is just saying that business consists of, I gave a different wording and I elaborated on that, but I'm just going to use my original wording here just for simplicity, of where business consists of three things. In one way of looking at it, business consists of three things only. The value is not just in of me explaining it is not just in those three things, but in knowing that you don't have to look anywhere else. That's real magic of it. And that's like traffic or lead or like relationships on which to base getting new customers, right? Is one thing. Then there's product or service fulfilling, right? Something that people will pay for. And then there's bridging those two with sales or conversion or decision, getting people to make a decision, right? So those are the three things, right? Traffic, conversion, and product. And that's it. Now that's an example of a more foundational perspective of a box that's correct, done for you, built for you. You can fill out problems if you're deeper concepts of life and how you go about goals and how you go about dealing with people and how you go about developing confidence and feeling confidence and all that. If that's screwed up, then that'll mess with you. But still, it's a useful, practical, fairly easy to understand perspective that you can stand on to take a look at what you need to connect the dots within your business, then that's very helpful. And that's why it's so helpful, is when you look at things this way in terms of where you're standing and why, right? Sometimes you want to stand in a place where you have a very detailed, immersed perspective inside of a small box. Right? When you're in the middle of talking to a potential client, then you don't want to be thinking about your business as a whole, right? You want to be immersed in that sales interaction, right? You want your perspective to be exactly as big as it needs to be and no bigger, and right, you're immersed. Okay. So given the traffic conversion and product perspective box, middle box, then you need to connect all the dots. You can't get traffic at conversion and have your product not be connected, including your traffic. Getting leads and converting them will be way harder because the dots aren't connected, right? And you'll naturally have less confidence. I talked about this last time, right? If you're not clear on the fulfillment of your product, it's going to bleed into the other areas. And it's going to erode your confidence. It's going to just erode your ability to overall have your business work. As I alluded to earlier, stepping back one or two notches with money overall in your life, if you're not making profit and you're not profit is probably just within the three things: traffic, conversion, product, right? You need to make profit. But if you're not dealing with your spending and have an overall scheme of how much money you need and how that's going to work for your life, period, right? Which is possible in a world with annuities and so forth, then the dots aren't connected in that way. And you very well may never achieve it because the dots aren't connected. And not having dots connected in a frame that's kind of one level larger than your business frame. So think of your business box as traffic, conversion, product, right? And then there's sub boxes within that. Your product itself is like a box, right? You're thinking only about the product for a little while. Let's say you're working on just that. Totally valid, right? To just work on product for a certain period of time. So that's your box for that time, right? You're standing there and you look at it, and then you could be working on one aspect of the product, and that's your box for one day or 1 week, just one part of the product. Totally valid to be just in that box. But you might be in that box and realize, wait a second, there's a question here I can't really answer unless I step back and think about what's my audience, right? Where are my leads coming from and what are they likely to want? So then you step back, right? And then you step into that, you can go zoom into the small box. It's great to have this overall framework with the boxes and thinking that way, and the value of zooming in, the value of stepping back, and how it works. And all of this is going to give us a terrific backdrop for being ready to think about how to think without perspectives and boxes separately. But at least for today, let's particularly cover this with the boxes. Like everything but revamping our deepest boxes, I'm talking about right now. So I was saying that it's interesting to note how by having a box kind of one step larger, let's say, of course, a step is, I'm just estimating, right? But one step larger might be your overall box about your money plan for your life and how you look at money, including spending and your savings or investment plan or whatever you call it. If you don't have that clear, then by having that one step outer box unclear, it erodes your confidence for dealing with the box that is about product, traffic, and conversion. Right? There's a way that by having the outer box weak and vague and wrong, typically, then people don't want to look there. And knowing that you don't want to, like knowing in a sort of intuitive feeling of unease that you don't really know it, like you're really aware of it, but you have that feeling where you don't want to step back and look at what's really going on with money in your life and your plan for that because you don't even know how to think about it or go about it. It just feels confusing and scary. Then that automatically gives you less confidence for dealing, makes you're already in the habit of not connecting dots, right? Remember the law of implication overall, what does it mean? You attract not what you think you're thinking about or you think you want, not the surface intent of what you're doing or thinking. You attract the implication of your thoughts. And the implication of this situation, if a person is in a situation where they get, okay, traffic conversion product, I got to get that. I got to do that. But one box outer, which is their money, their sense of how money works in their life overall and what's their plan for that. If that's not connected up and if that's not clear and solid and correct, then what happens? The implication is they're not connecting dots about now. The implications also that money matters. Follow this. So if I'm working on business, then money matters. I'm implying that money matters. And then this outer box about our general money plan in our life, we've already implied that it matters, and that's critical. If something doesn't matter, it's not that big of a deal if we don't understand it. But because we're working on business, we imply that it matters. So we already get that. We attract that money's important. And yet, if someone's unwilling and unclear and incorrect and doesn't have the dots connected about money, they don't have the dots connected about something important that they're implying is important, and they're not connecting the dot. So now you're attracting into your life, into your mind, and into your relationships, and into your actions, and into your result, not connecting dots. So you'll feel like not connecting the dots in your business. You'll feel like it doesn't matter because you can't feel like it matters. Because if it matters, you'll go to pieces. So your brain has to protect you from it. Think about that. Imagine this. Imagine if your mind let you feel like connecting the dots matters. But connecting the dots is critically important, right? For sales, Obviously, in a sales presentation, if in your head the dots are connected of your business, including the fulfillment, and if that you come across where your client feels like what you're saying makes sense, it's natural, how they pay you money, what you do, how they get results, the dots are all connected for them. Obviously, they're much more likely to buy, right? So connecting the dots is obviously useful. But about money overall, your dots aren't connected. And so your mind can't make you feel like connecting the dots is important. Because if you feel like connecting the dots in general is important, but if you're working on making money and your money plan is not connected, right? It's vague. That box is vague. Your mind can't make you feel like clarity matters if the outer box is unclear, because it's a contradiction. You'll go to pieces. So you have to feel like connecting the dots doesn't matter. So what does everyone conclude? They want to just believe that they're awesome, right? What people's mind typically makes them believe is that their outer boxes are fine. They're terrific. You're right. You don't have to think about it. It's not important. Don't look there. It's terrific. And every time you have a success, like you achieve a goal, that's taken as evidence that all your deeper thinking and model of the world and just you as a person are just awesome. You're just great. And you're confident now and it's terrific. And you can't ever connect the dots though. You can't ever be clear about things. Your whole system is based on vagueness and the appearance of certainty within the vagueness. And you have to maintain the vagueness for that. It's like someone in a relationship where they're sure the other person is nuts about them and wants to sleep with them all the time. They don't actually have sex very much, but they're sure the person wants it. They're just getting around to it, right? They have to do this project first, or they have to go to their classes first. They have to do this first and that. Everything's great. The person is into them. They can think of this reason. Oh, on Valentine's Day, they gave me something and we had sex then, or they gave me a gift and they're just into me, right? And you need the vagueness. You certainly don't want to find out for real, right? Because that might burst instead you develop a confidence based on just your own bias and projecting and coming up with a whole fantasy. And you see how that's literally necessary. If you're unwilling to connect the dots with deeper frames, then you have to want to not connect the dot at all. You're implying that vagueness is important, right? The outer frames are important. Money is more important than your business because if you inherited or were given or just whatever, if you got whatever, 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, whatever amount of money, business would suddenly seem unimportant. So money is obviously more fundamental unless you're trying to make money just to prove that you're awesome, in which case, let's suppose something else came along and not money then, but something else came along to prove you're awesome. Some super hot woman or man, whatever that might mean to you, including not just looks, whatever, decide that you're awesome. Maybe that you get less interested in your business, right? Because you just want to feel like you're awesome. And so you're finding that some other way. So it's more important, right? That kind of deeper frame about either feeling like you're just awesome or actually having money, whatever your reason for doing business is, then that's more important. And if that's vague, then vagueness must be more important than if you're vague where it's important, it doesn't make any sense to be clear where it's right? So you're going to intuitively feel like vagueness is nifty. You see how the logic flows and how the law of implication works, where you attract what you're implying, not just what you say that you want or think that you want on the surface. And that keeps iterating with deeper frames on life about fundamentally then who you are, why you exist, what's going on basically, right? How to be happy. Those are the most foundational frames relate to those questions, right? What's the relation between you and your mind? What's the basis for your power? Things like that, right? Those are your most foundational frames. If you're vague on those, you see how it all flows the same way. Those are the most important things. I mean, if you were assured of tons of power and happiness, automatically, let's just for simplicity pretend. I'm not saying that being crowned king would actually do that, but let's just pretend for a moment that if you're a crowned king, you'd have all the happiness and power that, right at your fingertips. Then you wouldn't care about a lot of the things that you're currently working on to get power and happiness, right? Whatever it might be. So the outer frames are more important because you can see that if you have them, then you wouldn't care about some of the details that you're worried about now. Once again, if those are vague and they're more important, then vagueness is more important than clarity. So you can't just say, I want clarity. I want understanding. That's what I'm going to go after. I'm going to make more money because David told me to be understanding a lot. I'm going to keep understanding more until I succeed. that'll do something for you, right? Saying that and thinking that implies that it matters, but a strong current is against you. So you're swimming upstream even while you're trying to swim. You're attracting two things at once in opposite directions. You're attracting clarity because you declare you want it and you hear me talk about it and it sounds great, right? Okay. More clarity I get about product, the easier and more reliable it is for me to make money and I'll make more money. More clarity I get about how to get leads and how that works in my audience and relationships, the more clarity I get about sales, I make more money. I keep getting more clarity about that. I keep getting more clarity about ranking my website until it ranks. That sounds great, Dave. And you do that, and that does help. And it helps lots of people, and they report back to me, that's great. However, there's a deeper current that's automatically working against them, which is that if your outer frames are vague, then you're attracting, and you feel intuitively like vagueness is even better than clarity, even while you at the same time feel like clarity's got to make sense too, because it's actually true. Clarity actually does help you. So you can see that, but you're constantly feeling like vagueness is great too. And your confidence is being undermined constantly by that intuitive sense that you're not, if you're unwilling to look somewhere, if you're unwilling to think about deeply about what's going on, about who you are and what's going on in the world, in your life. And I don't mean, again, like in the world with current events or politics or who's conspiring against you, like basically what's going on. Who are you here? How do you go about being happy? How do you go about making money? And how do you go about relationships? How do those fit into being happy and all that successful? That's what I mean. Fascinating, right? How that vagueness in the outer frame is going to bleed into and create a current or a default, or you're going to attract it. It's like a magnet, attracting vagueness, attracting fear, eroding your confidence. And there's no way out of it except for to not do that. Once you imply something, it's a magnet. You're attracting it. You can't not attract it while implying it. The way to not attract it is to stop implying it. And the only way to stop implying that you should not be confident and that vagueness is nice, which is not true, right? The only way to stop implying it is to actually get it right. You can't just declare that you're going to get it right. By actually getting it right is the real solution. That's the real, but by seeking to actually get it right, that's huge. As long as you're seeking to get your outer frames right, your basic, the most foundational frames right, then all of a sudden you immediately, that's the instant. When you get what it is you're seeking, you don't have to know the answer, but you get the question and you really get that it's important and you want to understand it. And I'm going to go directly after it pretty much in the next webinar. Okay. And I've already given you plenty of information about it, but I'll do it kind of with you and specifically like I'm doing with this series, is specifically going over things and addressing some of which I've talked about, or a lot of which I've talked about in various ways before. But so here's what we talked about today is in business, in order to make money, you need to connect all the dots, not just the dots that you're strong in, not just the dots that seem to make you money. Now, all of what dots do? All the dots you need in order to what? Get over the threshold, right? If you're making lots of money, that's over whatever bar you need to get over, then the dots are currently connected, either because you on purpose connected them through your own awesomeness and smartness and efforts and so forth, or you got lucky. And some combination of those is generally what's going on, right? If we're not omniscient, then we're harnessing a luck. But remember, there's a difference between having the house in your favor, right? Having a 70% chance of winning at blackjack somehow versus having no idea what your chance is or having less than 50%. So it's a very different type of meaning to harnessing luck once the odds are well in your favor and you know why. And that's how I try to operate and do basically operate. So I'm just kind of sizing here. So you need to connect all the dots in order to make money, period. You need to connect all the dots for product traffic and conversion. And also, if you're not getting, you tried it. Let me also be clear about another thing. The first thing I try, I said this in a certain way last time. The first thing I try, but I feel like it's counterintuitive that people don't realize this is how I actually do things. Because I talk about meta, right? Thinking, I talk about foundational thinking and frame. But the way I do it in practice, yes, I ask, what am I missing? I want to get my outer frames right. I've figured out a lot of those. But I directly go after whatever mundane thing I'm trying to do the best that seems obvious. If it's obvious I have no idea, then of course I'll try to figure out a recipe. But at the point when I kind of have a recipe that makes sense, that seems to make sense to me, I'll just go try it. Okay. In other words, it's perfectly valid to just try and make product traffic and conversion work directly without necessarily worrying about thinking more deeply, other than, say, listening to my webinars, working on it on your own time. It's perfectly valid to also spend time each day working on stuff related to law of implication. However, perfectly valid to just, in terms of making money, just go after product traffic and conversion. But like in essence, you're gonna, and going after it with the, if you go after it with the perspective of, I'm gonna, I'm gonna be looking to connect all the dots, not just things I want to do. I'm gonna look out for the following trap, basically. I'm gonna try to not just keep doing something that feels like it's making me progress, but it's like I'm getting more and more widgets in this part of the assembly line, and I'm piling up more, and that feels like progress. But there's another part of the assembly line that's stopped up, but there's a bottleneck, and I don't want to look right. Connecting all the dots is similar to removing all the bottlenecks, right? Kind of different ways of looking at the same ultimate logical thing. Both are metaphorical language, right? The reality is a blend of both. And both each, when I say connect dots or remove bottlenecks or remove failure conditions, like in the Ragnarok series that I did several months ago, I the same thing each time. Ultimately, I can get different angles on the same ultimate thing. And it's, it makes perfect sense when you just look at it, but then in practice, it's fascinating how much people get in the progress trap where they just want to do something that feels like more progress, right? But you need to do, and they'll check, they're like, do I want to do this? Instead, your first check should be, does this dot need to be connected? Not what's my strength or what do I want to do? Do you see what I mean? Treating what, another way to put it, which relates to what we're talking about today, making a priority or outer frame, more fundamental frame out of what do I feel like doing or what do I think my strength is or what feels like the most progress. That's the wrong question. That's the wrong outer frame. Think about it, right? The correct outer frame is what needs to be done in order for you to make money. Once you have that as the outer frame, then of course, inside of that as a secondary priority, if you can accomplish the same thing by relying on your strength or by relying on an in that you have, if I need leads, then going to current clients and asking for referrals makes sense. That builds on my strength. But if that doesn't work enough, then I need to go outside of that strength. But I can start with my strength, but the strength is is an inner, less priority, secondary priority. The outer box of that type of thing is connecting the dots. And so that's a great way, not wrap up in that. I'll stop this second. I'll spend a couple more minutes. But I think this kind of brings it to a very nice sort of conclusion or whatever, is make sure that your priority, that the fundamental question you're asking about business or sales or whatever is, are the dots getting connected to the extent that they need to be to succeed? And if you're, as another way of looking at the exact same thing, if you're not hitting your target and you're trying to figure out why, then look and see what dots are not being connected. Do not start by asking, what's my strength? What's my passion? What do I feel like doing? That's ridiculous, but it's very common. And also don't ask, what actions do I take that make me money? All you're going to do is come up with the stuff that's neurologically close. That's like most obviously immediately related to making money. But there's a bunch of dots that you have to connect that aren't in one sense close to you making money, but they're necessary. Like making sure the electricity is turned on in your factory. None of us have like physical factories probably, but I'm just saying it doesn't matter. Making sure that the electricity is turned on, right? And the bill is paid in a way that's going to get paid every month. Or even just making sure that maintenance is done to keep things from getting gummed up over time. That's not going to look directly correlated to making money. It's not the glory hound like I talked about last time. It's not the guy, it's not like the leading scorer on your basketball team, the center or whoever it might be, but it's a critical dot that has to be connected. So whether or not making sure your factory is maintained or the electricity is being paid in a way that's going to keep happening and without being forgotten or whatever, the electric bill, that doesn't matter whether that's your strength, your passion, something you want to do. Do you see? If you start with that question, that would be ridiculous, right? To make sure that the factory runs properly and keeps running. What question is correct is, what are all the dots that have to be connected? And it's not just each machine operating, but it's the maintenance of the machines, whatever needs to be connected in order for things to work. And sometimes you find that out by something breaking and then you realize the dot wasn't connected. Maybe you didn't realize one of those things about maintenance or a system for paying the electric bill without forgetting. But then it doesn't get paid 1 month, but then you make sure that dot gets connected in the future. So you don't necessarily have to connect every dot in advance like an omniscient psychic, but you need to get them connected for it to work. And if something isn't connected, you realize that and you connect it. So again, if you take away, of course, you should take away some critical other things. Oh, another critical takeaway from this webinar is probably a different integrated mental picture and understanding of boxes, how they work in perspectives, and also how the law of implication interacts with if you're unwilling or haven't gotten clarity with like outer boxes. An example of that or box that I gave was your overall plan for money in your life is a box that's one step outside and more outer and more fundamental than product traffic and conversion as a box for your overall business and that sort of thing. And then you might have a box just for your product, right? And you might have a scheme for that, right? I've covered some things for product and dimensionality. I think I covered it when I gave the new scheme with fulfillment and so forth. And then I talked about it in alchemy. All right. And then, so there's the overall thing about frames and boxes and clarity, and then how it's going to be important and we'll start to cover next time, how to think without a perspective. And when you do that, when we talk about thinking without a perspective, so unclear, nearly all the time you think with a perspective and with a lens. It is arduous, slow. It's fun and easy and reliable, presumably once you know how to do it right, to think without a perspective, but it's limited, in a sense, slow and painstaking. And so it's just applicable to fixing your perspectives. But then what's the point of fixing your car? To mostly drive right? So it's critical to be able to get your car fixed and maintained, whether or not you do it yourself or in this case, mechanic can typically do it, right? But that's critical, but you don't want to spend like all of your time fixing and maintaining your car. How much do you do? As much as it takes, right? But then the point of it all is to drive the car. So the point of getting your perspectives right is to use them and to think inside the box. It's fun and nice to think inside the box. And you actually want to spend most all of your life thinking inside of the box. When I say most all of your life, I don't mean in terms of years or months. I mean in terms of minutes each day. Out of your waking hours, you ideally want to spend most of those waking hours thinking inside of the box, not trying to figure out what's wrong with your box. But you need to figure out what's wrong with your boxes and get it straight as much as you need to until they're right. But the point of that is to use them once you have them. And that's nice and fun. So that's the relationship with thinking without a box. That's not the same as thinking. When you think without a perspective or a lens or a box in order to get things straight, that's the terminology of thinking outside the box is a little bit besides the point. You're thinking without a box in order to get perspectives right, which fixes boxes. And then to think outside of a box, you step back into a larger box, as I talked about. So that overall scheme, whether or not you come up with you'll probably naturally find yourself using this week and soon. But even if while you're sitting here, can't come up with exact how it's going to make you money tomorrow, this will be a very important part and building block of living an easy, reliable life with success and money and all that. Okay. I wrote, notice how priority affects us in immersion. I, in essence, address this. I'm not going to talk more about it on this webinar, and I'll continue on the next webinar. All right. How are you all doing here in discussion land? But I'm actually quite happy with how that turned out. I never quite know how things will flow out. I spent a while preparing, of course, for this webinar, as always, many hours, but that doesn't consist of writing the webinar out as a script or anything like that, or either typically, it depends. But with this, I didn't have a real clear structure. I had things I wanted to cover and a good understanding. Thanks, Mike, who said this is such an extraordinary series. I just got off the call with legendary Jay Abraham. He was marbling at what David has led with creating OMG. Oh, that's so cool, Mike. Jay Abraham was one of the originals with the sales and conversion and so forth. Megan. Mike gets around. Mike gets out there. Hey, looks like I kept everyone thinking. Hard hitting today, David. Your passion for this topic came through strongly. That's very helpful. Yeah, and it probably looked helpful to a good degree while I was saying it, but to whatever degree it didn't, this is a very important part of what I'm overall explaining to you. And it's very practical and relevant for ensuring your success. But it's a little bit, what I talked about today is also part of a bit of a greater whole that as it all fits together, it'll be terrific. Both relatively helpful in and of itself, or probably very helpful, but over time. But ultimately, as part of a whole that I'll continue to get to, it'll matter a lot. And I do the best I can with trying to make things immediately useful and helpful while also doing what it takes to give you the building blocks and the framework to understand the rest of what I have to say. Dave says it was a deeper distinction about Google and the search engine and how they rank. There was something bothering me immensely about it. I couldn't see it. Something like this. Oh, you're talking about, very cool, Dave. Dave was referring to what he wrote early, where he saw a deeper distinction that it dissolved a huge mental block I was having. And I thought the whole world just unraveled before me. It was very strange. And it had to do with Google and ranking. So terrific. So a very good blend of the immediately mundane and practical with deeper thinking and LOI and so forth. So wonderful. Terrific. And you can read his post for some clues on seeing Google and how it works. Maybe we'll have him share at some point. Yeah, I might actually have you. I might want to hear you talk about it at some point if you're willing, David. And then I'll make sure I finish at least a couple webinars or one or two webinars, what I mean to finish talking about here. But then maybe if you're willing, David, I'll have you talk about what you thought about. And it doesn't even matter how perfectly correct or not. Like, I don't even have to vet it. Just kind of have people share sometimes. Thanks, David. The power Megan wrote. The powerfully helpful explanation of solving blockages in two ways. Yeah, great. And there's something it's really important to get specific, like I talked about with boxes and how they work in order to understand the stuff that I'm saying. Very cool. Jennifer said hard hitting today. Yeah, you said Bill Cook, hashtag 10 million. That's great. That's from Alchemy, where I told people that I was going for it to be worth 10 million in the sense of if a friend came to after I finished the Alchemy series of 30 webinars, which I did. Was it almost 2 years ago now? A year and a half, 2 years? 3 years. Yeah, I did it in the summer 2 years ago. Often twice a week, but that's a great series. And I up front, I said that I'm looking for, if you were talking to a friend after finishing Alchemy, the 30 webinars we did live and then I recorded. And if the only possible way for them to get it in a world with no piracy or I was charging a ridiculous amount was to earn $10 million and then pay it to get the series, would you recommend that? And that you would. And I said I was going for that. And I got a lot of hashtag 10 million. That's what Bill's referring to. Thanks again for another great webinar. Goes so well the last one. I'm looking forward to the next one. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that very much. The rabbit hole deepens, insightful as always. Yeah, you're welcome, Lawrence. Hopefully you guys got some takeaway. Not that ultimately I want to just succeed in giving you the whole picture here, but this is relevant for me just to get a sense. Certainly this will help build for the future, but did you get a sense that you can use what I'm talking about? Was there something to take away from this webinar? And that, again, this will kind of help me calibrate of the future. I'm not trying to, I don't know, have you just tell me that you can. Very actionable in your opinion. Good. You've been re-listening through Alchemy. I appreciate that, Jennifer. Great. Many takeaways. Good, good. Yeah, it's pretty hard hitting, right? About how implying the vagueness about, say, money overall and your financial plan for your life. And I'm comfortable saying that because I've given you quite a reasonable answer, right? In our world, roughly around $3 million. It doesn't mean it's easy or not, but it gives you some plan. And it really helped me to have the set. If you, about $1 million in something annuity like, that could be whole life insurance that you annuitize later, it could be an actual annuity. What annuities do is they pay you out a certain amount for your entire life, however long you live. The main problem that you run into when you're trying, and that I ran into when I was trying to figure out how much money I needed, was when you're in stocks, which I admit tend to give the most return historically, you just have no idea what the heck you're supposed to put in there, how much you're going to need, how it's all going to work. And in practice, I didn't actually make money. When I had a sophisticated portfolio with a guy who managed my parents' money and my grandmother's money, and he's perfectly competent, perfectly legitimate, works with UBS Financial, but I didn't actually make any money. Like, it didn't actually grow over 3 years with like close to $500,000 in there. And with annuities and things like that, and most of my money's now, I had the same amount with UBS, but I didn't move that. But I have money with TIAA CREF, like Teachers Insurance. And for the money that I'm going to use up until 60 or so, I have that in, for me, municipal bonds get the most return after taxes. And I have an income from that now that's about the same as what I spend in a year. And that's a fixed, reliable income. And then with annuities, things like whole life insurance, I have that keeps growing. It grows in a reliable fixed way around 4%. and then I'll annuitize that. You can make an instant annuity anytime you want. So that just the return on that was a little bit better for now. And then I'll annuitize it in my 60s. And then I have an actual annuity and stuff like that. And then if you pay off your house and so forth, then that gives you a sense. Then you get a sense of your spending, and you have to, however low you get your spending down within reason, then that less you need for the rest of your life. And so you get a sense of that. You don't get a sense of inflation, and you can get it right. And just with that, it can give you a different type of confidence, right? Because you're willing to look at it and have a plan that makes sense. And the fact that you do have a plan that makes sense, if you do build confidence, it logically makes sense that you do it. Not only are you willing to look at it, but that you actually got it right. That's real confidence. Hi, David. Chad says, here's a good question here. How do you gauge if you're connecting dots to your benefit? First, you eyeball it and you try to get a sense of all the parts that are going to have to work. And you can use the 4 perspectives that I gave you top down, where you get a whole picture and you try to get a sense of what you need to succeed. And then reverse the top down. Bottom up thinking, the second of the 4 perspectives, is where you think about what problems you might run into and make sure you have a plan for that. That's not asking worst case. Look at my plan for money in my life. I don't have a plan for what if aliens come and blow up the world, right? If that happens, then it doesn't matter if I made $5 or $10 more million, right? Anyway, so I don't have a plan for every kind of Armageddon scenario. You can have a general sense of how I'm going to, now deeply, I have a plan in the sense that I most deeply have an idea of how my mind works, how to generally succeed. So that meta stuff will apply no matter what the heck happens, right? Or if the financial system collapses of some sort or whatever. But that's not planning. That's not planning in the way that what you do is you want to work with what's basically going on now, like realistic, right? Yeah. Anyhow, sorry. So connecting the dots, how do you gauge? So you take a look, and like with business, you need to have a plan to get traffic, and then you try it. And you maybe have a few different ways, and including like leads for clients that you can talk to, potential client. The dots are connected with that if it basically makes sense to you, right? And then you go try that. And if something's not, if the electric, if you look at an electric circuit, if it's like a kind of a somewhat complex electric circuit, I'm not an electrician, which is almost good because I'm going to explain this in terms that I think we can all relate to with electricity. But if you look at it and look and see if all the wires look like they're connected, right? So same thing with a sales presentation or getting traffic or your fulfillment. You look at it and you look and see if everything's connected. I was in the middle of the 4 perspectives, and I'll repeat that. The 3rd perspective is like you walk straight through it, right? All right, what do I do? Let's say he signs on with me. What do I do day 1? What do I do week 1? What do I do after that? What do I do after that? How do I know? And how do I know when I've fulfilled my SEO client? Or of course, not everyone does SEO client consulting, but that's an example. So you can walk through it, and then you can also walk backwards. What does it look like if I succeed? I get the guy ranked in the top 3 for several keywords. He's getting some traffic. What do I do right before that? What do I do right before that? So you're walking backwards. Those are the 4 perspectives. You walk through forward, you walk through back. After top down and after bottom up, where you think what could go wrong. When you think about what could go wrong, I'm talking about what could go wrong, not like what could go wrong if aliens invade or if the entire system collapses. Not that type. Or if my client turns out to be an axe murderer, you're not asking that. You're just asking what's within reason, what could go wrong? What might I run into that I might need? An example would be the client wants a progress report and they're wondering what you've done. You think, okay, maybe I should be proactive with that. Of course, this is directly in the training, right? From like Steven and people, but then you think, okay, he's going to want to know about his progress, and that can come up. If you walk through your steps forward, you might not realize that, or backwards. But if you're thinking, what could go a little bit off is they're calling me, they're like, well, how's my progress? And I don't know what to say because I don't want to say, oh, I made a bunch of links. He might want a different type. He might want something that he can relate to more, or she, my client. And so then you have a way to send them regular reports on their rankings ahead of time. And then you say, and you let them know that, and you let them know in advance how the progress will look. And so going back to the electric circuit mental picture, you eyeball it and look and see if it looks like all the wires are connected. Then what do you do next? You turn on the circuit and see if the light bulb lights up. And if it doesn't, then you go back and recheck things and see where it's not flowing. And if you check and you still can't find it, then you try to ask someone else who might know. You try to things like that, or find different ways to look at it until you see but you try to narrow down where the thing is where it isn't connected. the best you can. And then you try to stare at that or look at it from different angles and different ways until you figure it out. And then ultimately, if the light bulb lights up and the dots are connected. Now, sometimes the light bulb can light up, but you want to think, the next thing you think is, so with product traffic and conversion, there's 3 light bulbs that have to light up, right? Or 3 circuits that have to click that have to go light up the final light bulb if you're making profit, however you want. If you get each of the individual things right, the product traffic and conversion, and then if the light bulb lights up and you're making money, what's the next thing to do? Then, and really only then, in a sense, of course, you do this as best you can in whatever's obvious to you early on. But then you want to, there's plenty of factors that are outside your control still, right? And instead of just thinking that you're awesome because the light bulb lit up, then you want to think about, instead of just thinking about growing, you can also think about what else can you understand reasonably make sure it's going to keep lighting up, right? Sure, you can grow, but also look and make sure that you have a reliable system and get your system more straight, or get a sense of, do I want to focus on growth or do I want to focus on making sure I'm reliable? And the first thing I would do is have a reasonable sense that you're reliable, right? You're not omniscient, so you can't necessarily know all these things perfectly, but I would first try to make sure that it's fairly reliable and then try to grow. Because when you're growing, what are you doing? You're mostly doing more, you're amplifying what's there, which is also going to amplify the flaws which can make it more likely that the flaws are going to cause you to blow a fetus. So hopefully, is that helpful, Chad? Brian, talking about a takeaway, I think, says shifting my perspective to getting boxes right and using them properly was a big one for me. Very powerful insight. Yes, good, good. Yeah, for anyone kind of thinking inside and outside of boxes in general, then having it clear. And I didn't have it that clear for a while. That took a lot of doing. A lot of things are maybe obvious once I say them, but it took a while for me to get to realizing what it was in the first place. Like a lot of things are obvious after the fact. Like listening to someone do a good sales presentation, it feels obvious when you hear it, but there's a whole bunch of things they weren't doing or the preparation they did that it was a lot harder than it looks, so to speak, to do it. But then once you do it, then it looks obvious. Chad says, wow, thanks for answering that and connecting the dots. You're very welcome, Chad. Thanks for your great question. That really helps me to explain a lot that I didn't realize before. Mike says, for me, the undercurrent idea. It came to mind that that you would probably have an idea about getting those deeper perspectives, right? Like I illustrated with your plan for money, how if you have that vague, by the law of implication, you're implying that vagueness is good with something important because you're doing it, right? Vagueness, you're having it, and it's important because you're working on making money, but your plan for money is vague. And then you're going to attract vagueness into your planning and acting, and you're going to feel like vague is good. Even if you're going to feel a conflict between clarity is good because it's obvious why clarity is helpful, but yet you're going to also feel like vagueness is. So you're going to be pulled in both directions and it's inefficient and unhelpful. I was trying to look at that mic. Funny, Brian. Yeah, incredible, David. Counting cards. Yeah, exactly. But that relates to when we were playing Magic, doing something we called counting cards would always help Mike and me. Lawrence says, of course, it's crazy how much we don't see naturally there. Yeah, related to what I was saying about connecting the dots and the circuits and so forth. Bill says, I was able to use the last one immediately, and I'm looking forward to the last webinar. And I'm looking forward to zooming out from the business perspective and looking to get all the way out and trying to recognize anytime I feel closure that isn't based on a method and seeking understanding rather than closure. And it's okay with unimportant thing. How do I put this? We have a certain amount of focus that we, of course, have to prioritize. And so there's a way that having a certain amount of priority to getting your outer frame straight is critical. It doesn't have to be all day, every day, because you also have your life going on that you need to maintain and deal with, but that can be a priority. And then with clarity and closure regarding one-off, like things that pop up in your life that aren't necessarily going to come up very often, or you have a success with something that isn't going to come up very much. You don't necessarily have to have total understanding of how to repeat that success every time. Maybe you got a little bit lucky. Remember, you're always getting lucky by definition, even if you put the odds in your favor, unless you're omniscient. Of course, to the point where there's a lot of trials, a lot of activity. And if we're emailing 100,000 people with a conversion thing that works very well, then of course in one sense, there's luck, but in another sense, you're obviously going to succeed. I have a ton of annuities now. Yeah. Yeah. And Mike tries to tell other people, like he talks to a lot of people that are making some money, but they don't really have much. We run into almost nobody that like has a bunch, has a good plan for money, even a lot of successful supposed people. But people that are making money and yeah, something about annuities is that just doesn't click for them. They just, but it relates to what I said. I guess people want to stay vague. They don't want to think about their plan for money. They think that because they feel scared without realizing it or whatever. But it's interesting experimentally or experientially that as Mike talks about people about annuities, that doesn't really catch on with people. So you can read what Mike wrote there. Dave Keyes, 70%. A lot of things come into clarity with that concept. From Magic the Gathering strategy to today's webinar. Oh, yeah. The kind of being at 70% like capacity or something like that. Is that what you mean? If today as a kid, I discovered I would never lose. What did I say? Did I give another application of that? Sometimes things come out in my stream of thought and I mostly I remember. Sometimes I don't. It's like the things I use intuitively, but I might forget how I explained it or framed it. Oh, 70%. I said it in this webinar with the house. Exactly. That's what you're talking about. Absolutely. Like with a casino, 70%. Love it. Perfect. Great. Totally get it. Yep. And I don't necessarily mean that you aim for exactly 70. I just picked that out of the blue in that particular case, but it probably came intuitively from my intuitive sense of 70%, like 70% capacity, 70% chance is great, right? I get technically a 51% chance is good if you have enough trials, right? But whatever. Dave Key said that the day as a kid, I discovered I would never lose a tic-tac-toe again. Win or draw, but never lose. That actually made people angry with me. It's funny. Joseph Montero, can you summarize what you mean by rigging the game? Is it realizing to seek understanding until you win? Understanding what your power is as a conscious act? Yeah, ultimately, remember I talked on last webinar, I said that if you get what it means to where everything you're doing, both your thinking and your actions that you take, and then all feedback, if you seek it and understand what you just reasonably understand what you mean by it, if you seek understanding, right, you increase on the understanding line until you cross a threshold, then you're going to win. That's one fundamental way that I'm rigging. The game is now rigged to where you can't lose. You can get, the only thing you can do is get annihilated, right? Where, literally where you no longer exist consciously or whatever. Other than that, you're going to succeed. You just keep understanding. May I point out that if you were to be omniscient is the same thing as being all powerful, believe it or not, because if you fully understand every factor to achieve whatever goal or target or outcome, then that's the same as achieving it, like assuredly achieving it. We can't do that with like physical stuff, like with the environment generally, because there's no such thing as like knowing everything in the environment and what's going to affect it. But there's all sorts of stuff we can know. A lot of what we can know, just to give you an indication, is often people operate on certain premises and violate the same premises. So for example, if you want to make profit, like people will know in one sense of the word knowing that they want to make profit, but then they'll lose sight of that and violate and do actions and give themselves feedback and feel like they're making progress even when they're not making profit. Now, of course, if you're increasing your understanding, then that'll towards profit. Then you'll, but there's a way they'll fully take their eye off the ball where you can know, even if you don't know lots of stuff about the environment and where electrons are and, what decisions other people are going to make and what they're going to do, then you can know that you want to make profit, but then people don't act on that premise properly. They're not consistent with that premise. And that's one of the big things I'm going to talk about next time. As we think without perspectives, a big part of that method is going to involve consistency and knowing that if something changes, it's not the same thing. That's another thing we could know. It's one of the most fundamental things we can know is just something changes, it's not the same thing. And yet people violate that nonstop. Or if you have a certain budget, then you have that budget in terms of stipulating it, right? Like if you want to be kind to someone and then you're not, then if you violate I'm a little bit losing track of my train of thought, but I was talking about being omniscient and controlling all the factors. And in essence, the more you realize what you know and the more you stick with it, the more power you're going to have. Like what you know, in essence, is at least directly correlated with your power. I won't say is your power, but it's directly correlated with your power. And so when you violate it, you rob yourself of power. You don't use your power. And when you are consistent with what you know, which involves realizing it, and what people do is they don't respect what they know. It's not they want to know it all or just not respect it. It's if you're in a relationship with someone and you can't respect them unless they're everything you want, do just what you want at all times. A lot of people by accident are like that, right? They can be kind and loving and pleasant towards someone if that person's basically doing what they want and looks the way they want and act the way they want and is the way they want at the moment. And then when the person isn't doing what they want, then they don't act respectful or kind or tender or whatever. Or at least like they often don't, or sometimes do. In the same way, and in doing that, you rob yourself of a relationship that you could have. Same way with power and knowledge. Oh, because if you don't have it, I was saying if you don't have it all, you don't respect it. And so people are like, well, I don't know that this, I'll point out things that people know and they'll be like, but what about this, that, and the other thing? I don't know all these other stuff. The way you'll get so much success so easily if you respect what you do know instead of feeling like the stuff you don't know is just no good and you need to pretend like you know. Okay, I'll wrap things up here. I'll read Matt Kellogg's and then wrap things up. A potential fat path for making the money I need and getting out of the game while also escaping extortion legally is moving to Puerto Rico. Yeah, it's not practical or realistic for some people, but it's a good idea for others. It's when you step back and think, all right, what am I really trying to accomplish? I'm trying to make money and keep it. A huge factor in that is tax, which can be between 40 and 45%, maybe 3% less now since the tax cut. But whatever, then that's a huge part of your keeping money. And so for some people moving there, yeah, for me, it's not really a great option. But one thing I did do was I moved from Virginia to Tennessee. And that was pretty much helpful in a lot of ways. If I knew what I knew now, I'd probably move somewhere else, like maybe Texas or Wyoming. But the trouble with that is the web. There's a lot of other practical considerations. I don't want to be someone where my wife had people that she could interact with reasonably and so forth. But good thinking, very powerful. Good, I'm glad. Just make sure you find out everything. It's so freaking, the thing with the law is it's so freaking impossible to figure out what it is because there's literally no such thing until a judge makes a ruling anyway, but you can get some sense of it. And like with Tennessee, it's convoluted and there's convoluted stuff that's hard to figure out or find out until it could be too late or whatever. So just make sure that you have a sense of things. Rush Limbaugh's been talking lately about how in the past when he moved out of New York State, he moved to Florida. He was there most of the year, but they made this rule especially for him where if every day that he worked or broadcast or whatever did any work because he had an apartment in New York, even though he didn't live there, he maintained. So if you maintain a residence in a lot of states, if you maintain a residence, even if you live somewhere else more of the year, then they can try to get you. Right. So it's not the kind of thing I like to think about, but just be careful. And I don't even know how to be careful is the problem. My corporation's a Wyoming corporation, particularly clear and simple and helpful. I was really they actually knew what they were talking about. They're pleasant and simple and helpful, which I'd never encountered before and definitely didn't encounter in Tennessee and Virginia. We're trying to figure out stuff there. No matter where you live, you can have your corporation in Wyoming, which doesn't solve everything. You still have to pay income tax in your state if there's state income tax, but it can at least help with some of the corporate issues, even just annual reports or assigning income. If you assign income to a corporation in Wyoming, you don't have to worry that there's going to be some hidden crazy tax that you're going to find out you owed. You had no idea. They're just simple and clear and there's no problems as far as I can tell. Oh, very cool. Thanks for sharing the 4 perspectives, Peter. Appreciate that very much. Yeah, every time you use the 4 perspectives, it might feel like, oh, it's not necessary or helpful. But if you're taking a look at anything and doing any kind of thinking or planning and stepping back or looking to see if dots are connected, it's a very helpful. It's really going to save you time. It's not something I came up with in order to sound cool and sell a book or whatever. It's everything I teach you guys, I practically actually use. And then I think about, I don't come up with something that sounds clever and get excited because I'm going to talk about it and you guys are going to tell me how clever it is. I don't do that like really at all. And so I don't give you recipes unless I find them very practically things that I actually use. There's stuff that theoretically would be practical, but then actually you don't get around to using. There's plenty of that stuff, right? Everything I give you, I really actually use. I come up with ways of explaining things that I think of for the webinar, but I'm explaining something that I already do. And when I use something, there's lots of stuff that you read and recipe and like lists of stuff and self-help books, whatever that you read and it sounds good, but you don't use. But again, everything I teach, I find practically actually use. Yeah, exactly, George. Right. So it's that kind of stuff you have to watch out for. Okay. Wonderful, guys. Thank you so much for coming on live and for participating, and great participation, great questions, guys. Really got some extra stuff out of me. So that was terrific and perfect. 2 hours. And I will see you guys next week. Thinking maybe of doing one webinar where I continue with this, and then I might do a Q&A session about whatever, including OMG questions and whatever. Obviously, you don't ask me about SEO, but still lots I know about practical stuff about business and online business and sales and conversion and whatever. So I'll do a Q&A sometime soon for that. Janine, Peter, John, Grant, and the Q&A again won't have to be law of implication stuff. It can be as long as it's something that I generally know about. I don't really think of it this way, but I shock myself whenever someone does talk to me about like going over their business stuff. I just know a lot of real stuff that's a whole huge skill set that I talk about, and it comes out here and there. But all right, well, total triumph. What a Webby, thanks. You're very welcome, Michael Olmsted, and thanks. Binge rewatching, that's funny. You're very welcome, Zach and John and Peter and Matt and so forth. Okay, I'll end the webinar here and have a terrific week, guys.